Hi, Ross Ryan here, and you're listening to John Broughton on Retrospectives on 3SER KC Radio.
In the studio tonight is Ross Ryan. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for dropping down. And all of Melbourne wants to know, how's the door?
Yeah, well, the door's back up. It's not up very well, but I managed. A friend of mine finally came over, and we got it. So at least it's there at the moment.
It's hanging there. Oh, good. Well, we can all rest easy.
It needs some serious handyman work, which I don't know if I'm quite up to.
I did put a call out for a carpenter for you last week. No takers as yet. We're going to do a little bit of backtracking tonight and talk about your project in work.
Yes.
You're American by birth?
Yes.
Yeah. You ever stop and wonder how your life would have turned out had you stayed over there? And
yeah, I suppose I have thought about that. Whether I would have gone into music or not, I don't know. I know when I was faced with the choice of going back, once I started singing here, I didn't want to go back there. I had an album released over there, and I went to promote it, and I hated it. I mean, I liked it as a country. I just didn't like the music business. I thought it would be easier there than here in terms of you didn't have to be sort of gut-wrenchingly commercial, that there was more space. But I found that, I suppose I was in Los Angeles. We can't get much narrower than that. Yeah, I just didn't like it. The hype got to me. I didn't like the hype. So I made a conscious effort not to pursue a career over there.
So it was a case of a nice place to visit, but...
Yeah.
And you set up in WA?
That's
to
right.
begin with, yeah. Do you remember any particular moment in time that prompted you to decide that music's the way to go? Or did you just sort of fall into
it was a hobby that got out of control, really. I'd been a big music fan. In fact, I've always been a fan more than anything else in terms of music, and I'd worked out pretty early on that I could never become a Beatle. So I thought I might be able to become George Martin, though. So I got a job as a sound operator at a TV station in Perth, Channel 9 in Perth, and on my way to become George Martin. And whilst I was there as an exercise, I recorded an album of songs after hours. It took me about a year, 18 months to do it. And the Channel 9 let me have use of the gear in the evenings. And a local radio station got a hold of it when I finally finished. I had 80 copies pressed and covers and lyric booklets, most elaborate. And a local radio station in Perth got a hold of it. This is about 71, 72, something like that. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I was Perth's answer to Cat Stevens. And so they played tracks from this totally unlistenable album. It was just full of teenage angst.
Yeah. Because that was the height of all that singer-songwriter.
Absolutely,
wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and nothing much would have happened except shortly after that, Roy Orbison did a tour, and he needed a support act in Perth. And because I had been heard of because of this record they'd been playing, and I was also very cheap and easy to stage, they asked me to do the support. Mm-hmm. And then the promoters liked what I did, and then they asked me to do the rest of the Australian tour. And I was propelled into show business and haven't eaten since.
There are a few other homemade recordings in there too, weren't there?
Oh, yes, I've always been a fanatical home recording. Yeah, there's about 5 albums that were done in lounge rooms before I finally did an EMI album.
And you still have those?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's the box set that'll be out eventually.
Okay, what we're going to do now is play a bit of old stuff, talk about your new stuff, get you to strap on the acoustic later and give us some new songs and maybe 1 or 2 old ones as well, if that's okay.
Great.
Okay, and we'll take a track from the album, or the first major album for you anyway.
Okay.
As a songwriter, have you always essentially written for yourself first rather than an audience? Yeah.
I've tried to do otherwise. I certainly have no shame. I just find it too hard, and it never works out. Mm-hmm. You try to imagine an average person to be writing for, and you'll fail. I mean, at least I have. You think, oh no, I'll put something that's got millions of hooks, or rewrite an ABBA song, or whatever, and I end up hating the song anyway, and I never perform it. I've had 2 or 3 attempts at sort of, I write a good commercial song, and I end up sort of never playing it, hating it, and pretending I had nothing to do with it, you know.
I get the impression, just reading a little bit about you, that you're not a fast writer.
No.
Tend to labour a bit.
Tad slow, yes.
Is that for what, being a perfectionist or very self-critical, or what do you think is that?
All that and probably gross laziness. I must admit, I'm not as interested in it as I used to be, because I'm more interested in more things. I'm probably as interested. It's just that as you get older, your taste and your interests get so much broader. So it's not the centre of my universe as it used to be. But I think that music's changed anyway. Its role in our society. I mean, I can remember when I was younger, and a new Beatles or Stones album or Dylan album come out, and you'd wait up till midnight and they'd release it and they'd play the whole thing, and they had big deal things like that. And I think that video did kill the radio star in a sense. And now as we're moving into multimedia and stuff, it's like music's become the soundtrack to something else.
How do you think you coped with the sudden fame? When we just played a track from the My Name's Means Horse album, which was probably the big breakthrough for you. Looking back in retrospect, how do you think you coped with the sudden fame thrust upon you?
How would I say it? In two ways. One, I was quite young, so I just more or less enjoyed it. And secondly, I didn't take it. I don't think I took it very seriously, because I just thought everybody was loonies. I mean, I'd come from Western Australia, and you'd kind of looked at the eastern states as a bit like being overseas, and there was sort of people from Perth that had done well in the east, and they were sort of looked upon with awe. So to actually come over to the eastern states from Perth and to have some success, I didn't sort of feel like I was part of the Eastern Staters. I just felt that they had this lapse in taste for a few years, and they let me in their little club. And I always thought it was funny, because I always found it funny the way that... See, being a fan and being in awe of certain other performers, I was able to picture myself in the reverse role. Even though by law's averages there's maybe one other person up there I've spoken to that felt like that about me, misguided though they may be. I can't picture to this day a rational person taking their well-earned money and going to a shop and buying one of my records, when there's perfectly good albums by fabulous people out there they could buy instead.
He remains forever humble.
I'm not saying that in a humble way. No. It's just lack of concept. It's like I said, it's so much being a fan. It would probably spoil it if I felt that I was like one of the big guys. We're talking about that wave of singer-songwriters that were around that time. Were you ever comfortable being pigeonholed into that, or it didn't bother you? I didn't mind being a singer-songwriter. I didn't like being termed a folkie, which was kind of the label that went around, because to me, folkie was the Kingston Trio and stuff. And I didn't consider that my influences, like early 70s, was kind of American West Coast music and the singer-songwriter genre, the Jackson Browns and the Joni Mitchells and the Crosby, Stills and Nashes and such. And they weren't folkies. They were singer-songwriters. It was a different thing. It was soft rock, I suppose. That's what it was. Which reminds me, I saw some very interesting footage of you the other day. In glorious black and white, knocking out a very passionate version of American Pie at Sunbury. Yes, I came across this recently myself. Yes, I didn't even know it existed until this friend of mine brought me a videotape over of it. And I just couldn't believe, one, that I'd sung American Pie at Sunbury. And second, there was a small orchestra there. I don't remember them. Don't remember them. That was all very impressive. Yeah. Yes, the audience sing along. He gave me this tape, and I ran a dub off, and it took me nearly a year to work up enough courage to watch it. Once I found out that I was at Sunbury singing American Pie, and finally I thought, I've got to look at this eventually, so I did, and it was okay actually, considering it was American Pie. And I thought so. And I had flares on. Yeah, there were flares. Yeah, that's right. I did get a glimpse of the flares. Okay, we'll take another track. I'll get you to run out and grab your guitar, and we'll get set for the first acoustic. It's from Ross. It's closer in tune than it was before. This is a song that was on an album that Paul Wookey. Do you know Paul Wookey? Yeah, name rings a bell. He's a Victorian lad. He's now living in Tamworth, but he's a blues country player, and we recorded a country album that never got released. Recorded in Tamworth. And I really like it as an album. It's a shame it never got released. Anyway, it was all covers, and this is one of the ones we did. It's that old Hank Williams song.
Why don't you bring it to me? Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me, yeah. Well, I'll give you money, too, but that ain't all I'd do for you. So why don't you bring it to me? Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me.
We're talking about all the fame and fortune that was thrust upon you there in the early 70s. You had a brush with the Prime Minister?
Yes, indeed. Yes. Met Gough, King Gough. Got to meet him. To my knowledge, I was the first person to get a gold record from a Prime Minister, I think.
I would say so, yeah.
I'd say that was the first one.
Not many since, I would say, either.
Oh, surely they must do it all the time now. There's votes in it now.
That's true. Good photo opportunity.
Yes, indeed.
Were you feeling any pressures after the success of Pegasus to come up with more of the same?
Yeah, that was... Because, I mean, I'd only been in show business about 10 seconds when all that happened. And for someone who wasn't even planning to get into show business to suddenly have a smash tour with Roy Orbison, a record contract, and like the first album I did, which was... The album before the Horse album that Pegasus was on, my first album was Record of the Year, and I was Best New Talent. And I just thought, like I said, I just thought you people were loonies. I would have thought you had to pay your dues, at least for a couple of months. And I couldn't see the point. To me, that my first album was just... Well, they all are, but this one particularly was just full of imperfections and was kind of like a stepping stone. And you kind of think, what did I do right? All I can hear is all the wrong bits. And so that was very strange, yes.
Yeah. I read where you said that the Pegasus album financed a decade of self-indulgence. Do you really believe that?
Well, in a sense, it did. I mean, I didn't do anything, risque or law-breaking necessarily. But the self-indulgence being is that I could do what I liked. It brought me that opportunity. Mm-hmm. My overheads weren't very big. We were all hippies back then. You could live on the smell of an oil rag and a few record royalties. And so I managed to spend most of the time travelling and living out in the country. Mm-hmm. Very nice, thank you.
And what's probably annoyed you more over the years? People always asking you what Pegasus is about, or people wanting you to sing it all the time? Or has neither of them bothered you?
No, they did for a while. It bothered me for a while, and I changed my attitude, particularly to Pegasus, when I heard Muzak versions of it. And once I heard a Muzak version of Pegasus, I realised that it had become a standard. It didn't belong to me anymore, and I needn't apologise any longer. So and it's quite, I mean, I tell that to people and they think, oh, how dreadful. But it's really flattering to stand in a lift and hear your song. Some ditty you sat in, 20 years beforehand and wrote in your lounge room, and suddenly you're in a lift somewhere or on a plane. I heard it on a plane up in Kununurra of all places, like, leave me alone, I'm trying to get away. And I'm sitting on this plane and I hear Pegasus. And of course it took me like a good verse and a chorus before I even recognized what song it was.
Yeah.
You can hear a song sometimes, you go, oh, I know that one.
Hang on, that's mine.
I really know this one.
So that stage show you did not too long back, Sing the One About the Horse, is that sort of in reference to all that?
Yeah. That was mainly just that was a line that came about. Well, actually, it came about a lot. It seemed to be the one I used. But particularly when I first started out, when I was a lot more angst-ridden than I became, I'd be doing these tours, particularly I remember this Queensland tour, and of course, because you just had a song on the charts, they chuck you on tour and the likes of Queensland, and everyone comes to see you because, they've heard of you. And you got one song that they want to come at, in my case, so they hated all the other stuff, which were just the same as Pegasus, except they couldn't hum that one. They didn't know them. So they'd do things like, because I was doing an acoustic act, and there was like kids that were turning up, 13, 14. And I never really made a very good pop star, particularly in the eyes of Queenslanders, 13-year-olds. And so I remember one saying, sing the one about the horse so we can go home. So I used to start the tour off with it and clear the house and get back to the hotel early.
Have an early night, yeah. Do you still do it?
Sure.
Do you do it tonight?
Sure. What's that feeling? I think it's in G.
My name means horse, and I can fly high with you, but I change my course. I am Michael, I am Jeffery and John, and I don't want to leave you unless you want me gone. I am Genesis, I have no fears. I make my plans to land for. I plan to stay here. I am Simon. I am Demetrius and John, and I don't want to leave you unless you want me gone. I'm flying, but let me down. I don't need the things once kept you around. It's not too late to know who I am, for I am Sagittarius. I'm flying, but let me down. I don't need the things once kept you around. It's not too late. Do you know who I am? For I am Pegasus. My name means horse, and I can fly high with you now, but I changed my course. I am Michael, I am Jeffery and John, and I don't want to leave you unless you want me gone.
Do you listen to the old albums a lot?
Well, not at all springs to mind, but I did have to listen to them once again. It was like not listening to the American Pie at Sunbury video for a year. When I did a compilation a few years ago that EMI let me put together, and they let me pick all the tracks, and which I think just saved them having to listen to them over. It was my theory. And it took me 6 months to get around to I could actually steel myself to sit down and listen to my albums again to pick out which tracks to use, because I only had bad memories. There's a great quote from Warren Zevon about recording, and he says, when you hate everything about it, you know you're done. And that's kind of how most people I've spoken to about records feel, because you live with the songs for so long and you're always dissatisfied. There's always something that bugs the heck out of you. Something that no one else will probably ever hear. And you forgot the reason you liked the song and why you wrote it and why you even bothered to finish writing it, because that's really the test. And you just don't want to ever hear it again. And you don't. You never play them. But you go to people's places at parties and they think they're doing you a big favour by putting your records on, and you just want to cringe and hide, But so to answer your question, when I listened to them back for it, I'd forgotten the bits I hated. And I found that I actually enjoyed them more than I thought I would. I mean, there was still a fair share of cheesy stuff there. But songs that I would have thought, oh, no way, I actually thought, that kind of worked okay. That was all right. The weird thing was playing songs that I'd forgotten not only were on the record, but having written them or anything about them. That was a weird thing. There was a couple like that.
Did I write that?
Yeah, I wonder what happens next,
So of the albums, album sales aside, which one do you sort of look back on with the most fondness?
The first one, probably. The first one, the first EMI album, the last EMI album, if that's the ones you're talking about. The first one for EMI, just because it was such a buzz to have a record contract and to have, once again, these little ditties I'd written in my lounge room with orchestras on them and a real producer and a real studio and all that. That was pretty magic in itself, just the act of doing that. The one I like, that I have very fond memories, was the Smiling for the Camera, which I did with Rick Formosa, who's still a good mate. He doesn't live too far from me, in fact, now. Because that was just great fun doing that one, because Rick was a great musical collaborator. And he was just, we sat down and talked a lot about the songs, and being an arranger as well as a producer. I thought it was really, I thought that his contribution was just great on that record. And I think it's the better songs too, of the four.
Tell us about some of your other forays into stage and television. You've dabbled in a few things over the years, haven't you?
Yeah, other than I did host a teen show once, or a music show in Brisbane for a while, but I used to bag all the EMI albums, so they didn't get me to do it for very long. They got Mike McClellan to do it instead, because he was a nicer person. And then I did a show with my friend Mike Mead, who he used to have a show called Flashes.
That's right, afternoon show.
Yeah, with Ray Burgess on Flashes. And then when Flashes folded, the ABC asked me if he wanted to do a kid show. And because I was a friend of Mike's and we were sharing a house together and stuff, because we knew each other from the Channel 9 days in Perth.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, well, you would like to do a show with? And so he picked me and another friend, and they said, you're here to do a kid show. So we'll talk about self-indulgence, folks. It was supposed to be an 8 to 12-year-old appealing type show, and it ended up about 19 up. A kids comedy show. And so for a year they paid us very handsomely to come up with funny ideas that we'd then the next week get into funny costumes and act out, and I think 4 people saw it, and we had a great time.
What was it called?
It was called Give 'Em Heaps.
Give 'Em Heaps.
It in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they talk about the entry in the guide for Earth was harmless, and they updated it to mostly harmless. Well, there was a book that came out which was a history of Australian television, and Give 'Em Heaps, they say it was silly, and that's all they say about the show, which I take as quite a compliment, really.
We'll take another track and maybe get you ready for a new one.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the new ones. This is called Lovers Turn to Thieves.
Don't want your safe confessions. Don't need your sleight of hand. You measure every deed and detail like so many grains of sand. And every heart that's ever been broken, will you just probe them and analyze? Well, surprise, mine survived. You took every precaution, then made every mistake. I closed my eyes for just one moment, but that's all the time it takes. I may stumble and I may falter, but I know that I will not fall. I grow stronger, and I no longer feel love at all. I've been picking up pieces, I've been down on my knees, humble and hungry, in desperate need of release. You can make your deals and steal back your power, or you can cower and run for cover. It's one thing or another when lovers turn to thieves. It's one thing or another when lovers turn to thieves. Well, you can keep your reflex friendship and your knee-jerk honesty and every single act of passion or word of love you stole from me. But as the night surrenders gently to the clear cool of the dawn, I know my honor and my duty, beauty lives on. 'Cause I've been picking up pieces, I've been down on my knees, humble and hungry, in desperate need of release. You can make your deals and steal back your power, or you can cower and run for cover. It's one thing or another when lovers turn to thieves. It's one thing or another when lovers turn to thieves.
Is your, would you say your method of songwriting or practice of songwriting has changed a great deal over the years? Your approach to it?
It's become more varied. I've got more ways that I write. Not being particularly prolific, you're always trying to look for shortcuts or something to get you going, to get you into it. I've unlike a lot of my contemporaries, I have embraced wholeheartedly the advent of technology into music. Having toured with enough bands and worked in enough studios with players that you spend half your time trying to engage their interest in your dreams, I'm quite happy to sit in the studio and spend 10 times as long and do it myself and get it the way I like it. You can't beat real players, but I'm not a muso's muso, you know, like there's some guys that'll just sit and get up every morning and practice for 2 hours because they just love their instrument. And I'm not into all that kind of stuff. I write songs and words and things, and to become a great player has never been my ambition, and hence I'm not. I tease my musician friends by telling them that I'm like an architect, that songwriters are like architects. You don't need to know how to lay bricks. So being able to sit down with a drum machine, if nothing else, that's got different feels, has changed my writing a lot, because you are limited to what your own playing is normally, particularly for feels and rhythms. And if your main instrument's acoustic guitar, you find you come back to the same old strums. And whereas just different feels. That makes a huge difference. So I probably write a wider variety of styles now, and with a and a wider variety of feels. And I think that's a great thing. I think for songwriters, the advent of the technology has just been the best, really.
Have you ever consciously sat down to try and write a masterpiece? Like, this is going to be my ultimate statement.
One of the songs you played earlier called Anthem, that was an attempt to write something serious, and I realised that the subject matter I was writing the great Australian novel type song, at least how I looked at it, and that was a real challenge to do that. And I was really pleased with the song when I finished it. There's not that many that you write, because you can always hear them, or at least I can always hear them in my head first before they're done, because I can imagine how the song would make me feel and what kind of song it is. And then this is agonizing process of getting it into like a form that you can actually sing and write down.
Yeah.
And Anthem was like that, and that took a long time to do. I'd probably thought about that for a couple of years, that song.
Really?
Until I came up with the first line, which was someone said, "God bless Australia," and we all looked embarrassed. And I just liked that line, and that was kind of the hook of the song into it then.
Speaking of lines, I dug up an old Rolling Stone interview with you the other day.
Oh, thanks, dude.
And you mentioned...
Is that the time?
And you mentioned then that when you sat down to write a song, you always had this line in your head that all the world needs is another song.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Did you ever use that line?
In a song?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
You still believe that?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
I did quite profoundly for quite a while, and that did bring my writing to a screeching halt. I mean, it went from a dribble to a halt. And it's kind of back to the dribble stage now that I haven't written really seriously for a good 8 years. Maybe more, maybe closer to 10.
So a lot of these songs for the new album span
there's a couple that go back to then, but most of them were written the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Once I decided I was going to do an album, then there was a reason to write. I've more or less backed off on the touring that I used to do. I kind of feel I've spent my time in motel rooms, thank you very much. So there was never a need to write a song just so I could play it to myself. You do need an audience. I've got this theory that pure art, true art, because everyone's saying I'm an artist, you wouldn't even bother to write it down. As soon as you create it and put it that someone else can look at it, then it becomes commercial.
Yeah.
Because it's involving somebody else, even if it's just emotionally commercial. Does that answer your question?
In a roundabout
very
kind of
vague way, yes, I suppose it would, yes.
Is that a true story I read about the live album that got taped over?
Yes, that is true, yes.
Oh, a terrible thing to happen.
Yes, because what had happened was I was doing a campus tour down here, and we decided after the first two albums, this was with EMI and myself, and Peter Dawkins, the producer, that because my live shows were totally different than my albums, because my albums were pretty much melodramatic, depressing little things, and whereas my live shows were sort of verging on becoming comedy shows. Which was a conscious thing that I did, because I thought there's nothing worse than sort of like some up there all night just sort of going, this one's another depressing one, and here's another one, and here's another one, and it's in G as well, same as the last one. That if you talked about the songs, even if you sort of sent them up a bit or sent up the circumstances in which you wrote them. So if I'd written a song about my girlfriend dumping me, but told the story of how she did that in a funny way, one, it's broken up the depressing songs, but also it's given you a hook into the song. That when you actually hear this song cold for the first time, which most singer-songwriters, that's what you do, you kind of think, well, here's another one I've never heard before. And they're listening for the clues, and that's why he did that, or that's why she did that.
Yeah.
And that's why on most of my albums I've done the same thing. I've always put lots of notes in my albums about just background to them, because I like that myself. I like to know little
what it's about. Yeah. So what actually happened with the tapes?
Oh, right, yeah. So anyway, we recorded this live album. We recorded about 4 campuses down here, and went back to Sydney, and the master tapes were left in the producer's office, and they had they were accidentally mislabeled. I mean, I think that was what the exact words that I was told, and they were re-recorded over, and we didn't even ever get to hear them. We didn't even play them back. It wasn't like it was the lost album, because it actually didn't even get to be an album. It was, several boxes of 8-track tapes and
Lost forever.
Lost forever.
Goodness me. Okay, what we'll do, we'll take another track, and then we'll come back and talk about what's in store for the future.
Okay.
There's a new project in the works. Was there any one particular motivating factor that prompted you to get back into it? Back to recording? And
I hadn't done it for a while, and I've felt that I had at least another album in me. I hadn't done a studio album for so long. I finally did a live album that didn't get erased, and I did have a few songs I really did like, and I thought it would be a shame that they weren't at least in a form that they existed so I could walk away from them. You know, things kind of hang over your head. And once I decided I was going to record them, then I started writing again and thinking of things that worked around it. And I think that's probably the reason. I'd also been putting it off. I'd been wanting to record again, but I have this almost pathological aversion to the music industry. And to me, just recording again meant record companies and publishers and people and all that kind of stuff. And I just felt like I'd already been through all that. I didn't want to do it again. And it had spoiled it for me in the first place. So I just got myself in a position where I could do it myself.
yeah.
So I set up my own studio, and I don't have to compete with anybody, and I don't even compete with myself, because most people wouldn't know or care, wouldn't compare what I did to whatever I was allegedly did before. And if I can market it in a small way, I mean, I think the Jim Cairns method of marketing has a lot to be said for it. Sort of, niche marketing, no overheads, and just a small market with a reasonable profit margin. I don't want to sell 100,000 units. I'd be quite happy with, say, 2,000 to 3,000.
Yeah.
Because record companies pay you 7%, and if you do it yourself, you get almost all of it.
That's right.
Who needs them anymore?
So, any thoughts, perhaps just easing your way back into the live fray as well, or that's...
Well, I did a gig on Sunday, which I hadn't done one for yonks. I did one at Lancefield Wineries.
Oh, yeah.
The Andrew Patterson Extravaganzas. And I'm doing another one up there on the 7th of December. But no, I don't do that much. I'm tossing up putting a band together to play around Melbourne again. It's just that the studio that I've set up, a house band's evolved. So there's a really good drummer and a great bass player and a great guitarist, and there's these people that I know that we kind of sit around and play, and they're in various bands together or not, and everybody's in 3 bands nowadays. And I thought, well, gee, there's this whole band just sitting around here. I could at least go out and do something. So I may do something next year.
Yeah.
But I've never felt much point going out, particularly touring, unless I had new product.
Yeah.
I think it's stupid just to kind of go out and be a 70s revival act. Fooey Pashar.
So maybe a few quieter venues around Melbourne, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us about your collaborator on some of these songs. Brock, is it? Brock O'Connor?
Brock O'Connor, which is short for Brian O'Connor.
Ah, right.
So that's where the Brock comes from. Brock, we've known each other for about 15 years now. And he's a Canberra lad. And he was in several of my bands in Sydney. And then I moved down here, and we didn't sort of play for several years. And finally he and his wife and family moved down here. And by chance they moved in like the next street away from us, and they had this huge garage that we converted into a studio. So the studio's actually at Brock's place. It used to be in my house, and that was disastrous.
Not practical.
Well, it's just you're never home and you're never at work. Your life is a constant grey area. Because like you'd be trying to think about doing the family bit, but then your mind is sort of like winding a tape back or formatting a floppy disk. And while you're sitting in the studio, there's the phone's ringing, and dear, can you come in here and just hold this and stir this? And it just, you were never in one place or the other.
Yeah.
So just the act of getting up in the morning with my briefcase and guitar and trotting off to the studio even though it's only a couple of blocks away, is just enough difference that you're at work and then you come home and you're home.
Yeah. That's fair enough. And people can check on the progress of this album on your
yes,
website.
Indeed. I got interested in the internet about 18 months ago, and some friends of mine put up a web page. And I just couldn't believe it, that someone I knew had a web page. How do you do this? And I found it wasn't all that difficult, so I frantically downloaded everything I could find on writing HTML, which is the code that's used to write web pages, from the internet. Unfortunately, 95% of the internet's about the internet, so you can find out heaps about writing web pages. And I came up with this mob called the Dibblies, which was based on a distorted photograph a friend of ours did that my family and we used as a Christmas card one year. And so just to teach myself, I put the Dibblies online, and with the intention to do a Ross Ryan site, and then they got out of control.
And watch those Dibblies.
And now that and there is a site now which is called You Can Trust Me, a website, which is a companion piece to my album I'm recording. And the idea is that you can get updates on how I'm going with the recording, and I've tried to do it in a light-hearted way, so I've tried not to appear that I'm taking it all too seriously.
Yeah.
And that's what the Dibblies are really there for, because the Dibblies also have a Ross Ryan site called the We Remember Rossi Ryan site, and theirs is totally crass and over the top, and they have merchandising like little things you shake with snow in them, with a flying horse in them, and they do dumb stuff like that, and they're really these dreadful over the top train spotting type fans. So but sort of both the things I'm interested in. One gives me the interest in the album, the other one's my John Cleese fantasies I get to enact.
So people can check that out on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get your pencils ready, folk. The address is, these are all small letters. If you're familiar with internet type things, you'll know what I mean. http://www.pn as in Nelly c.com.au/ again, really there. Then a tilde, which until I had to actually have one an address, I didn't know what they were, but they're the horizontal squiggly line that's
squiggly things,
sort of up on the left-hand top corner of your keyboard, one of the ones you shift. A tilde, then Wincom, WINCOM, dot, no, sorry, cross a dot, Wincom, because I actually didn't write this down, Wincom //Ryan, RYAN.htm. So one more time, it's http://www.pnc.com.au/tilde WINCOM/Ross/Ryan.htm. And there I am.
And
if you send me email, you get a credit on the album. That's the deal.
Yep, send him some mail, tell him to hurry up if he's taking if he's dwelling on those songs for too long. You can give him a bit of a needle.
On the Dibblies, that's what's taken up all my time.
And if you didn't get any of that, you can always do a search on, I know you can find him through Alta Vista, the search engine. Have you set a finishing target date for this, or?
Next year.
Sometime next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't see it being finished this year at all, but I hope to finish it. See, what's happened is, as soon as I set the studio up, I've just been offered work to record other people's albums, which I love doing. I've got to become a record producer. I got to be George Martin. And I'm recording, I've already done, I did one for Mike Mead, he did one last year, and then I'm doing a band called Swift Tuttle, which are kind of a retro 60s band, which are really good, and a country band called the Junior Dale Band. I'm producing their album as well.
So all that in between your album?
Yeah.
Busy boy all of a sudden.
But I got this great deal, you see, because I can tell people, you can come in, I'll produce your album, record it, I can do your cover art, because I love doing artwork.
Yeah.
I can do your cover, and you can have a website. What a deal.
What a package deal, yeah. Not bad at all. We'll take one more old track. We'll get you to strap on your guitar for one more new one, and then we'll wind it all up.
Okay. This one's Chase the Ghosts Away. This one's pretty recent, this one.
such a journey, and the roads are haunted by the ghosts of dreamers who kissed the gifts away. And I'm a relay runner, a part-time companion, with a heart that's made of clay. I've long abandoned the burdens of ambition, and I've long forgotten the meaning of my name. I'm between that rock and a place that's even harder, and there's nowhere safe to stay. But can you give me shelter? Can you give me silence? Can you give me stars and perfect moonlight? Can you give me thunder? Can you give me laughter? Can you give me happily ever afters? I'm a true and fierce believer, but in shadows I see faces. Can you give me love without a question? And tell me, can you chase the ghosts away? Ghosts away. Ghosts away. Love's perfect moments, they're few and fleeting. They give no warning, they're impossible to hold. For even at that moment, you cry out in celebration. The ghosts are watching, waiting for your heart to lose control. Can you give me shelter? Can you give me silence? Can you give me stars and perfect moonlight? Can you give me thunder? Can you give me laughter? Can you give me happily ever after? I'm a true and fierce believer, but in shadows I see faces. Can you give me love without a question? And tell me, can you chase the ghosts away? The night was cold and I woke up with a fever, and from the shadows I swear voices called your name. You gave your answer with eyes that stared straight through me, and I've never been so afraid. Can you give me shelter? Can you give me silence? Can you give me stars and perfect moonlight? Can you give me thunder? Can you give me laughter? Can you give me happily ever after? I'm a true and fierce believer, but in shadows I see faces. Can you give me love without a question? Tell me, can you chase the ghosts away? Ghosts away. Ghosts away. Ghosts away. Oh. Ghosts away. Oh. And I haven't worked out how to finish it yet.
Very nice indeed. In your absence from the music game, or whatever you want to call it, have you sort of kept tabs of what's going on? Do you listen to a lot of recent, current music, or...?
Not really.
No?
I never have really. I mean, I did in my sort of, teens and early 20s. It did spoil it a bit getting into it. Once again, this fan thing I was talking about, that you'd start listening to songs for different reasons. You'd sort of be thinking of, you hear a song would come on, you'd sort of go, oh, they haven't got to the hook yet. Or I wonder how they got that kick drum sound. And it spoils the magic,
You stop being a fan, and yeah.
And that spoiled it a bit. You found that you were kind of being competitive. Somebody do something and it would kind of make you feel insecure or weird or whatever. So it changed the values a lot. And I listen to the all the top 20s, and always make sure on Saturdays and Sundays. My wife and I usually watch the whatever program it is. It's on whatever station it is that plays the top 20 or something on TV. I found it a bit disappointing. One, because there's so many covers. I'd much prefer to hear what some person's thinking in 1996 rather than somebody wanting to cover some song that I've already heard, from my youth.
Yeah.
And probably preferred the version because that was the one I heard in the first place. I like rap. I think rap was a and interesting. It's not music that is supposed to appeal to me personally, because I'm not a black person living in a large city in America, which is, I think that's its audience, really. But I like the fact, just mere fact that words have come back. That it's a lyric thing that makes rap work. And people says, oh, it's the same melody and it's really tuneless. Well, I kind of feel like there's a direct link, like from Chuck Berry is sort of like a lot in there, You kind of listen to, I will motivate over the hill. I mean, there's one note here. I will motivate over the hill. So Maybelline and the Cornville. Don't you just kind of put a bit of a backbeat to that, and you got rap,
Got it, yeah.
So I like rap. I think I like the humor in it. I like the energy. And I don't like sort of cheesy disco covers of songs that weren't that good in the first place.
Fair enough too. If it was 1973 all over again, what would you do different this time around?
Knowing what I know now, I would pay more attention to the money. Like everybody else, I lost heaps of money to dumb, naive deals. I had a tax problem that went on for yonks. I had paid tax but couldn't prove it because of some charming person I used to do business with. I only managed to fix that up about 5 years ago. Well, see, I know more about the industry now. So at the time, I didn't know anything about it. It was like a monolith. And now I would approach the industry probably a bit differently if I knew what I knew now back then. But not really a lot. I've been my own worst enemy in a lot of ways because I haven't taken it very seriously. So I have a reputation for making really dumb career moves. But I'm not particularly career orientated, so I probably couldn't have done it any differently, and I may have ended up coming at the other end sort of filled with self-loathing.
Yeah. So it's not something you've lost a lot of sleep over?
Not at all, no. I was doing my, as I call my 15 minutes, I felt really kind of uncomfortable in that role. I liked the fact that it allowed me to meet interesting people, and you can't help but not like the attention. But it's like it happened to somebody else now. And I don't feel like I have to live up to that. I don't think that I have to do another Pegasus, because that was a kind of a fluke anyway. I was kind of like a bejeaned, bearded, singer-songwriter, wrist on forehead type person who happened to get a single out. And the people I admired, which were the Leonard Cohens and the Joni Mitchells and the Crosby, Stills and Nashes, they never had hit singles. Occasionally, but essentially they weren't top 40 acts. They were album acts, as we called them back then.
Album acts, yeah, that's true.
So I was an album act, and just happened one of these ones slipped through the net,
Fair enough too. Well, look, I want to thank you for your time tonight.
My pleasure.
It's been a joy to meet you and talk to you.
And I apologise for last week in my door.
No problem. We're all praying for that door. We hope it comes back to life and it's all repaired and stands up as strong as ever.
Thank you.
We might get in touch with you again when the album's out. Maybe get you back to talk about it and play it.
Sure.
And when it's all in the can.
Yep.
And thanks once again, Ross. And thanks for coming out to the suburbs, the outer suburbs to meet us. I'm glad you found us too. Okay. Thanks very much to Ross Ryan.